Good morning everyone. This is week 3 of Line and Wash. I can't believe how quickly the weeks are going by in this situation. And I've discovered that I only have 28 minutes and not 30, and this is why it cut off last week. I apologise. So I'm going to get straight on and say this week we're going to concentrate on foliage and reflections. I know most of you have got foliage brushes, which are these. Hang on, there we go. God, why can't I make that show? Here we go. Little fuzzy ended brushes, which make lovely foliage type shapes, and we know that we can also use this one for grasses and things like that. And for reflections I often use a flat brush. So I'm going to get straight on and I'm going to show you some different ways of actually creating nice foliage into your work using those brushes. I've got my normal greens, which can be as dark and as light as that, with the Windsor Blue red shade and the Aureolin, and the dark one, which is they're both opaque, is the Payne's Grey and the Cadmium Yellow. So you can vary those greens, and that's why I have them in little pots like that together, or in any section of your palette together, so that you can vary those greens, because obviously if you have a lot of greens in your subjects, you need to make sure they're varied and creating some interest with them. I'm just going to turn the music down a bit. There we go. So I've got the medium foliage brush here, and I'm going to start off by using it quite dry. It has got some wetness on it, but not a huge amount. Keep an eye on that. And I'm going to actually stipple in. What you can do is press it into the palette to make it wider, and like a little sweeps brush really, and then just stipple it on to create some distant small areas of foliage. Okay, if you go over the same place too many times, it actually won't work very well, because you'll start filling it in. And then when you put a little bit more water in, you can get those same marks, but a little bit more pronounced. Okay, so that's that one, and it obviously, as always, looks so much better when it's dry. So all of these things need practice, but that has created nice foliage for me. Now I'm going to make it slightly wetter, using that same colour, and again pressing it down into the palette and into the paint, and this time trying not to go over the same place too many times, because it is actually so much wetter. But really nice for bushes, leaves on trees, anything. You can actually press it into the yellow a bit more to try and vary it, and it also helps you to very easily leave light and white paper. Okay, so that's using it dry, and that's using it slightly wetter. I'm going to use it really wet this time. Right, here we go. So this could be in the distance where you don't actually see very much light coming through at all. So I'm not leaving very much light or white paper here at all, and would be nice in trees or whatever. Also you could use another colour and pop that into the base of it, or in fact some dark. Okay, so that creates lovely distant foliage, especially if you were to use it a little bit lighter than I have. I'm using it quite dark because I want you to see it better. This time I'm going to put it into the light colour, the brighter green, which I use in the summer and the winter. I use the darker one, so a lot more. So I've actually put my brush into both to see whether I get nice variation by twisting and turning my brush. Lovely colours. And again, if you've got depth within a bush or a tree, you can make it deeper and stronger in the centre, but getting lighter above and above, you know, in the branches that might be on the outside of a tree. So be careful about how you think about it a bit before you actually apply it. Be careful about the way you apply it. I set the timer and that hasn't worked, so I've no idea how much time I'm going down. Grasses, you can also use those foliage brushes for the grasses. I'll try the smaller one, you can get a little one. I can send these to you if you haven't got one and you're itching to have one. So again, splay it out and you can make lovely grasses very easily with using the foliage brush. What you must do is try to vary your greens if you've got a lot of green going on in your pictures, by putting different tones in, different colours. Have a bit of depth down this side maybe with some. And obviously, as always, it's going to look better when it's dry. So what you can then do is to get your sword brush, which I know most of you've got, and you can put some in the front. More precise ones, because the trouble is when you're painting a landscape, sometimes you're quite close to the subject and you see the grasses and you tend to depict every single grass. Well, it doesn't really look right like that in a picture, so be careful about not being too detailed and precise. But that's a nice little patch of grasses there. Or you can just, if you've got maybe some foliage around a tree, you could just use this sword brush. I think I showed that last week. I tend to forget what I have done. But let these colours mingle, let them, as if they're all growing together and you're getting different tones, different shapes, different colours. Some might be bent over, some may have some little seeds on the top, so use the tip to create nice interesting shapes and natural looking foliage in your work. And don't forget it's watercolour, so popping water back on always creates nice marks. Okay. So that's that page, and when it's dry I'll post it so that you can see what they look like when they're dry. I've drawn a tree here, and I'm going to see if I can pop a little bit of foliage in that tree. My brush has got quite wet now, so I've got to make sure that it's dry. Again, use a towel rather than just kitchen towel, because I don't think the kitchen towel is good enough. I think it gets too wet. So here we go again. And you can see that I've left little shapes of just clean paper between my branches because I want to make sure that some of my leaf is in the front of my tree. If you actually paint or draw all of the trunks and branches to begin with, then you're going to not leave any space for your foliage to be in the front of the tree. So be careful of that sort of thing. And you can then go back when you've finished putting some foliage in. You can then go back in and thread some more foliage through. I've got a little distant tree here. You can thread some more branches through the foliage afterwards. Maybe make this one a different colour with different tones in. If you don't like your foliage, I like my foliage to be quite blue. If you don't like your foliage to be quite so blue, instead of using the Winsor Blue red shade, try ultramarine instead. So I've got some nice foliage coming here, very easily with my foliage brush. Okay, there's often a lot more depth through the centre of a tree, so I'm twisting it around there and putting a little bit more in through the centres while that's still wet. You can go a lot slower than me and be a bit more careful about, think a bit more about what you're doing perhaps than I've got time to do right now. But they look okay. You can get your little round brush out perhaps and just touch some water back in while it's still damp, just to loosen it up a little bit and move that painter around a bit so that you're getting some lights and darks in your tones quite easily then. But as I say, what you need to do next is to get that pen out and the paint again and thread some finer branches through the foliage. But I want to show you some reflections now. So I'm going to try and reflect those trees down into the water here. But first of all, I'm going to actually just put a little bit more foliage in around the tree and this will all look a lot darker to you on screen and on my photos than it actually is. I'm finding the same thing looking at your pictures, that there's a lot more depth showing of darkness than is natural, but that's alright. Right, so I'm leaving white paper. Always leave white paper for life in your work. It gives light and life. Oh, my brushes have all got a little wet now, so do make sure that when you're doing grasses and things like that, that you still have quite a dry brush going on. I've used it a lot and so therefore it's got wet. You'll just have to watch out for that. But I'm going to put a few more nice little single ones in the front here just to loosen it all up a bit and make it look a bit more natural. So do make sure you vary your greens. Right, maybe put a little colour into here. have actually got some distant foliage there, which I'm not going to make much of. But the foliage in the distance, while we're talking about distant foliage, has got a lot more blue in it. That will create distance in perspective, in colour, as well as being flat and dull and no detail. So it will have more blue in the distance. And as you come further forward towards the foreground of your picture, put more yellow in, and more life, and more detail, and so on and so forth. And that way you're going to create some distance in your work. Right, okay. So I need now to put a bit of a riverbank in here, I think. Maybe the flat brush would be good now to create some depth here. In the riverbank, dropping water back in, creating lovely marks with that paint. Right, and while that's still on the brush and still around, I'm going to actually reflect that back down, but in a lighter way. So a reflection is going to be a mirror image of what you've just painted. Don't get confused with the shadows that you might see, because they'll be going off in a different direction. Your reflections are going to be a mirror image as far as you possibly can with your paints of what you've just painted above. Depending on the light source, sometimes they're darker, sometimes lighter. I'm using a lot more water now just to mix that up a bit. Depending on the light source, sometimes the area above the reflection in your subject is going to be darker, sometimes lighter. I like it this way round, being darker at the top, you know, in your subject rather than in the reflection, because I feel that it actually gives a nicer effect in your painting, and you've got the strength in the subject where you really need it. So just popping a few grasses in here very lightly, and then getting my flat brush back again and just mingling it around so that it's going to look like water. Lots of different ways of painting water, but my best tip for that is to leave lots of white paper. Now I need to put the tree in, and I painted the tree trunks with my mix of ultramarine blue and burnt umber, which creates a varied brown. And I like a little bit of a bluey colour into my dark browns. So being as careful as you can, try to simulate what you actually see more or less in that subject. So that's darker. I'm trying to be quite quick because I've got to not allow that to dry too much before making it look like a shadow. You can wet it a bit first if that helps. And then maybe your round brush to show the way that the branches went. So I'm trying for a mirror image here under pressure. And the foliage is going to be more or less out of the picture. Shadows do very strange things. They and reflections, they can travel quite a long way. So something that might be a long way away, you'll still see very clearly in some water. So, you know, there might be a bit of foliage showing. So careful as you can, show that little mirror image there. I hope you could see that. I keep forgetting to look to see if I'm on screen. I know I am now anyway. Right, so using the flat brush, trying to create that tree trunk. And then there's this little one that's going to be about here. And then with your water, just try to loosen that up. Nice clean water. I did actually put a little wash of the watercolor down first so that I didn't have completely white paper showing through. I let that get a little dry, so be careful that you do bits as you go. But while we're on the subject, if you do create a mark you don't particularly like or want to keep, if you use a little bit of your magic sponge, you can just wipe through, and I've just eliminated some of that. This is a very, very good thing to have. It'll take almost anything away. So, and then I would need a little bit of foliage showing here in the water. But only very softly and lightly. Dry brushwork works really well in a situation like this where you don't want to show that up very much. And then of course you have got the distant foliage just showing. Although it's a long way away, it still probably would appear in your reflection. So just create a little bit. So this might be, something like this might be quite a good way to start off practicing some reflections with a tree. I would have normally put some sky down behind first, which I actually haven't done. But I think you can see the reflections reasonably well, and they don't look too bad. But obviously you can go back in now and put some depth in here if you wish, so on and so forth. But that's the method that I use for creating reflections. I also painted those trees. You might want to try just painting some trees sometime. I actually painted those using the water-soluble Tombow pen for the tree trunks, and allowed the tree trunk colours to actually just blend into the foliage a little bit. That was a real quickie, but it kind of worked well. So that's another way of creating some nice tree trunks and allowing them to blend. And they might blend quite nicely into reflected water, I don't know. 2457 it says on there, I better move. What else did I want to say? Yes, the other thing is, with the line and wash technique, you don't have to draw everything with the pen. You can, if you wish, leave some of it just for the painting. So that's what I did on this little farmhouse. I did draw the farmhouse completely with pen, quite a fine pen, because it's distant and I didn't want it to show up and come too far forward. So that was a fine pen. But for the rest of it, and definitely for the hills, I didn't draw them. I just painted them. I didn't even draw it with pencil, and it's better not to, because it's easier to have your nice big round brush and just paint those in without getting too involved. And then leaving it. Don't touch them too much because they'll come too far forward. And then use the foliage brush for putting in the foliage there. I'll post that one if you like, so you can see what I did. No pen really going on in the foliage. Here's a little reflection in the water, very clean, clear water without very much colour into it at all, just leaving it light and then popping some reflection in quite lightly. So don't overdo the water. Showing you the boat again because of the reflections on the side of the boat. Nice reflections, they work well if you can always show something like that, so that the water is reflected up onto the boat. I wondered what else I could do that would show nice reflection in the water, and I'm on the pink again. So I actually painted this flamingo standing in the water and just a little touch of water at the bottom here with a little bit of reflection on his legs. But then I decided to keep going, and I did two in the water reflected. I think those two are a little bit fed up with each other in this lockdown thing. Not looking happy. There we go, there's the reflection in the water. So you might want to think of something unusual to reflect into some water. Here's a painting that I did draw the whole of, Willie Lott's cottage. I tend not to draw the reflections generally, but I did draw a little bit of the reflection with the pen, and it's worked all right because it was a fine pen, but I think you do have to be careful about that. So try it and see how it goes. Try everything, see how it all works out. And for those who want to stick with the flowers, I did a geranium in my pot. Some of you are getting a little bit worried about backgrounds as well, so don't think that you always have to put a background on. You don't. That stands up very well because it's been drawn with the pen, so you don't have to have a background. But if you want to put a background in, you can. So I did it both ways. One with a background and one without. So the choice is yours. All pen, some painting, whatever you wish. And I think that's just about all I need to say. Try not to use too much masking fluid, especially if you are trying to paint